Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Light channel. My name is Scotty Meyer, and I'm very excited to share with you guys today just a topic of how God can rescue us from whatever we get ourselves into. And I want to share a little bit of my testimony with you. So I'm glad you guys joined us, and I hope you're in for a little treat here. But before I get started, I actually really would like to read a verse to you that is very impactful to me. And it'll make a lot of sense as I share my testimony with you, kind of how God has given us so many precious truths in his holy word. And let me read this to you. It comes from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5. And I want to start with verses 1. But of the times and of the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord shall come as a thief in the night. I'm sure you guys have heard this Bible verse before, but listen to this. For when they say peace and safety, and then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. Listen to this carefully, because this is beautiful. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. You are all children of the light, and you are children of the day. You are not of the night, nor of the darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that are drunken in the night. But let us who are of the day be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for a helmet, the hope of salvation. Brothers and sisters, what a beautiful verse, right? We know that Jesus is coming soon. We know that this day is going to come as a thief in the night to many. But listen to those words. It says that we're not children in darkness, that we should not know when that day should come. We know the time is getting near. And it says at the end of the verse that we need to put on a helmet and really the armor of God, right? What is the armor of God? You know, you've got the helmet of salvation, right? Who is our salvation? That's Jesus. You've got the sword. The sword represents the Bible. Who's the whole Bible about? That's Jesus, right? You've got the belt of truth. Who's the very definition of truth? That's Jesus, right? You got the shoes of peace. Who's the Prince of Peace? That's Jesus. So our battle, literally, in this part of the world is to just put on Jesus. He's already won the war. And so I wanted to share that with you before I get into my testimony, because sometimes we get ourselves into major trouble, and we walk away from God, or we maybe have never grown up to know God. And I think only in the end of the world will we see how many times God tried to win us. All throughout our lives, we can see the little thread of him constantly pursuing us and trying to win us into his fold. So I want to share with you a little testimony of I grew up in a little town in Northern California called Paradise. And I grew up in the Adventist faith. I grew up in the church and was always going to church as a child. Never missed a day of Sabbath school. And my parents were very active in the church. And I grew up going to church schools and had a very, very great childhood. But from early on, my parents just kind of had a cautionary approach to anything that had to do with the television or entertainment or music. And we didn't grow up with TVs in our homes. In fact, as a child, I played outdoors much of my childhood. My brother and I were very much so into various different types of sports, and we just never really spent much time indoors, as do many kids these days. When it comes to the TV, my father was just very adamant about not watching television. And he had a 8mm film camera, and he would buy my brother and I lots of little films to basically create these stories that we wanted to make with our friends. We would make tree fort stories, and we actually made Lego stories, and we would do all kinds of different stories, and we'd get my dad to shoot them on his little film camera, and then we would edit them together. And so I had actually a fascination with making movies from a very, very early childhood. And when video cameras started coming about, my brother and I got a hold of some video cameras, and we would always make little movies with our friends. I remember this one time in high school, my older brother, he decided he wanted to kind of have a very action-based movie, and he was wanting to explode a car. And so he went to the fire station, and he actually talked with the lady that was there at the front desk at the fire station, and he said, "I would like a permit to be able to blow up a car." And she kind of looked at him and said, "Why would you want to do that?" And he said, "Well, I'm making this movie, and I really want to do this crazy scene." And she said, "Well, we don't have a permit specifically for that, but I can give you a permit to burn some leaves." And she wrote out the permit, but she wrote on the permit that they were going to burn a car. And so they got this car, they brought it out way out in the middle of a field, and they rigged it with all kinds of explosives, with gasoline and all sorts of other things that would make it blow up really well. And they got their cameras going, and then they brought some buckets of water so they could put the fire out when they were finished filming. And so they got all the cameras going, and they said, "All right, ready, action!" And they blew up the car, and it exploded into this big fireball. And then they went to go throw the few buckets of water that they had onto it, and the fire did not put out. And it kept burning, and it kept burning, and it burned all the tires, and it burned the car up, and a big plume of black smoke went straight up into the air. And pretty soon you see the fire trucks coming down the road, and they were winding around, and they came out on the field. And I didn't know this, but sometimes it's very difficult to put a car fire out. There's some magnesium in the block of the engine, and if you put water on it, it can actually explode and cause some damage. So they had to spray a special kind of foam on the car, which is very expensive. And the fire chief was pretty upset. And so he looked around for who's responsible for this. And when he found my brother and his friend, and they found out that he was making a movie, he was pretty upset about it. And but they ended up taking my brother to court. And my brother had this little permit that he had gotten from the fire station, and he said, "I asked for permission before I did this, and this is what the lady told me." And so they actually got out of it. Don't try that at home, though. This is just a story for illustration purposes. But anyway, our love for creating films really continued on even in through our high school days. My older brother is only about a year and a half older than I am. And so we were very similar in age. He was only one grade ahead of me in school. And when we got to college, I didn't know what I wanted to do for a living. And they have a career day when you first show up for college. And it was at one of our Adventist colleges. And they had a bunch of booths, and there was a film degree booth. And at the film degree booth, there was a famous actor's brother. Maybe some of you have heard of Harrison Ford. He played in some of the Star Wars, and it was his brother, Terrence Ford, that was sitting there in this booth at one of our schools. And I said, "Wow, this is crazy. Like, there's this famous guy, and he's literally teaching some film classes at the school. I like film. I like to make movies." And so my brother and I signed up for those classes, and not thinking that, maybe this is something I would do for the rest of my life. But the second I started taking these classes, I was hooked. And Terrence Ford had a lot of Hollywood connections. Where I went to school was sort of up in Northern California, and he took us out to George Lucas's studios out in San Francisco, and we got to watch a couple movies being made. And from that point on, I just said, "Oh, I want to do this for a living. Like, this is exactly what I want to do." Now, Terrence Ford wasn't a Adventist, and he was kind of an interesting guy. He lived in the town that was just below the school, and the school didn't really know anybody that knew film, and so somebody had a connection to him, and he would come up and teach these classes. So he wasn't doing it for any sort of religious reasons. He wasn't teaching the classes so that you could learn media and go out and share the gospel with using this format. He was really educating us from a worldly standpoint, and really encouraging all of us that we needed to go to Hollywood. In fact, if we wanted to make it famous or even make it successfully, we couldn't do that unless we actually went to Hollywood. And so this was very impressionable to me at age 19 years old. And as I was watching my school bill stack up and get more and more, and he would make comments in class that would say, it doesn't matter if you graduate from here with a film degree. When you go to Hollywood, you're going to start from the very bottom anyway. And, you're going to learn basically as you go. And so I was kind of like, well, why am I spending all this money to go to school if it doesn't matter? And so at age 19 and a half years old, I actually pulled out of college and I moved down to Los Angeles. And I didn't know anybody in Los Angeles. Actually, that's not true. I knew one person in Los Angeles, and it was a girl that I had known in my earlier childhood. And she was an actress, and I was watching TV one summer, and I saw her on Seventh Heaven. It was an old TV show. And so I called her parents up and I said, "Oh my goodness, I just saw your daughter, and she was on Seventh Heaven." And they said, "Oh yeah, she's out in Hollywood. She's an actress." And so I connected with her when I moved to Los Angeles, and I quickly saw how people treated her. And I went, "Oh, wow, I want to do that." Like, being behind the camera is fun, but oh my goodness, being in front of the camera, people really treat you with respect. And so I quickly got an agent and started going out on auditions. And I chased that dream of trying to be in front of the camera for about 6 years. And let me tell you, let me back up in the story a little bit here. Growing up in the church, I was a good kid. My father was very interested in teaching us how to read the Bible and have Bible studies. And so as an early youth, I was very much so involved in the youth groups. I was very much so involved in reading my Bible. I read a lot of Spirit of Prophecy. I knew a lot about this war between Christ and Satan. And the second I moved to Los Angeles, I stopped reading my Bible. I stopped going to church. I stopped having any sort of connection to anything that had to do with God. And I started to replace the people in my life that were church-going people with worldly people. And I started hanging out at parties, and I started concerning myself with literally, how do I make it successful in this world? How do I become famous? And I figured that the best way to do that was to just embrace the Hollywood lifestyle, and really, it's who you know. That's kind of a phrase that they always say. It's who you know. And so I just would try to party and meet the right people that could climb me up this ladder to ultimately fame and fortune. And real quick, my life spun out of control. I was more concerned about going and partying than I was doing anything else. I got myself involved in drinking, got myself involved in drugs, and pretty much that was my lifestyle for about 6 years. And I came to the place that I said, you know what, this is not happiness. Like I've met all these celebrities. I've met like people that I know that are quote unquote making it famous. In fact, one of my friends, he started booking a lot of different films and started really getting a name for himself. He had a really nice house in Beverly Hills, and he was booking commercials. He was making lots of money, and he had pretty much everything that I wanted. And I hung out with him one day, and 2 days later, he hung himself in his apartment. And it shattered my world. I just could not believe how and why he had everything that I wanted, and he was miserable. In fact, the more people that I met that were making it famous, and the more people that were just like, looked so perfect on camera, the more that I actually met them, the more I realized these people are miserable. That's why they're the biggest partiers. They're the biggest drug addicts. They have the most problems. I mean, you can read the tabloids. You can see the things in the news. There is a lot of problems that celebrities deal with. I don't believe that humanity was meant to be worshipped like these celebrities. I think that messes with your mind. And I think that's what is actually, one of the reasons why these people struggle so heavily with a lot of things. But I really wanted to be happy. I had a normal childhood, and I literally said, okay, God, I need to get away from this lifestyle that I'm getting right here. And I figured that, well, since I have a background in film and I know how to make things, why don't I just go ahead and work in the behind the cameras? And my older brother Tom when I moved down to Hollywood, he moved down about the same time that I did, and we were very close in college. He was pretty much my best friend growing up, and he lived in about 15 minutes away from me. I lived in Hollywood. He lived in Venice Beach. And I never saw my brother. I mean, I would maybe visit him once a year, maybe twice a year. He quickly got a job working as a cameraman. He worked on shows like The Amazing Race. He's done things like Kid Survivor. He's done The Biggest Loser and a lot of different kind of reality type television shows. And so I quickly called him up and I said, Tommy, can you get me a job? I'm miserable trying to be in front of the camera. It's such a selfish industry. I'm constantly running around with pictures of myself, trying to make myself look cool or attractive or whatever. And I said, I'm just sick of it, and I would rather work behind the camera. And so he got me a job working as a cameraman, and I worked on The Biggest Loser. I worked on a lot of different variety of television shows. And I found that lifestyle was ironically not much different than the lifestyle that was in front of the camera. Those people still partied. They still had crazy lifestyles, and just was a toxic time for me. And I lived this way for about 10 years, and I just had a lot of issues, a lot of problems. And my brother's 10-year high school reunion came up, and he asked me. He said, "Hey, Scotty, I would love for you to come up and come to this 10-year high school reunion with me." And he was one grade ahead of me. And by this time, it was about 10 years since I'd been to a church or even set foot in around any kind of Christians or anything like that. I'd surrounded myself with just worldly people, and I even wasn't really talking to my family at this point in time. Very rarely would I actually go and visit them. And so I just had little to no connection with God. And I said, you know what, Tommy, that's not for me. I don't want to go. I don't want to be around those kind of people. And he just begged me and begged me. And he said, please just come. It'll be fun. I don't want to go alone. And it'll be just fun. We'll go to all the old spots that we grew up in and stuff. Now, Paradise is about 10 hours north of where Los Angeles is. So it's all the way almost near the top of California. And we were in Southern California in Los Angeles. And so for whatever reason, I agreed and jumped in the car. And as we drove up to Northern California, and we were going by some of the same towns and cities that I remember as a childhood, I can remember these memories flooding back into my mind, and just thinking like, man, I grew up here, and I grew up in Christianity, and I really have nothing to do with that now. And as we pulled up to the school, we were pulling into the parking lot, and some of my friends' parents were getting out of their car right next to us. And they jumped out of the car and they said, Tommy and Scotty, how are you guys doing? We haven't seen you guys in so long. How's Hollywood? We heard you guys have moved down there, and you guys are working on all these movies and television shows and things like that. And that was pretty much what everyone wanted to talk about the whole weekend. How's Hollywood? What celebrities have you met? Where have you been? What kind of things have you done in this world? And that seemed to be the topic of conversation for whatever anybody we met over the course of the weekend. And I remember on Sabbath afternoon, it was just very strange. People were treating us like we were celebrities, even though we're not, and not even close to it. But they were just kind of crowding around us and treating my brother and I noticeably a little bit different. And there was a young kid who was about a couple of grades below me in school. So he was a few years younger than I was. And he was there still in the same town. And he was watching the way that people were treating my brother and I. And he kind of waited till everybody kind of walked away. And then he walked over to my brother and I, and he said, hey, Tommy and Scotty, it's great to see you guys. And let me tell you a little bit about this kid before I tell you what he said to me. And he was a real problem child. He was the first one to try drugs, first one to get kicked out of school. He was always kind of a rough child. And his parents were pastors at one point in time. And so, sometimes, a lot of the times, pastors' kids struggle very much so with some of those things. And he was one of those type of real bad black sheep type personalities. And here he is approaching my brother and I, and he's standing there in his suit and tie, Sabbath afternoon. And he says, Tommy and Scotty, it's great to see you guys. All these people want to know what you've done in this world. And, they care about what movies you've worked on and stuff. But I have a real serious question for you. And he looked me straight in the eye and he said, Scotty, how's your relationship with Christ? And I just kind of said, excuse me? What? Are you kidding me? And I said, you of all people? Oh, what in the world? And he said, I want to share with you what Jesus has done in my life. Would you be willing to come over to my house this afternoon? And I'll share with you. And I'll tell you what, I was intrigued. When you see someone's life completely transformed, there is something attractive about that. There's no denying that. And so I went over to his house that night, and I remember sitting there listening to him read from the Bible, and he was pulling out scriptures, and he was talking about these moments that God had really won his heart over and how he transformed his life. And I can remember just sitting there listening and just going, wow. I mean, it's been a long time since I've heard anybody speaking like this. And it started to get dark at nighttime. And he said, hey, Scotty, and Tommy, I'd like to pray with you guys. Would you be all right with me praying with you? And now I grew up in the Adventist church, of course. I grew up praying, right? And I said, sure, why not? This would be great. And so we gathered together to pray, and he put his arms around us. And my brother and I, we all started to bow our heads. And my brother had his boxer dog with us. And his boxer dog was always one of these really sweet and kind and loving little dogs. And the boxer dog literally started barking in the air like it was going to attack something. It was backing up to us, and its hair on the back of its head was coming straight up. And it was just rah, 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 barking right into the air. And we thought it was funny, but we're out in the middle of the forest, and this could easily have been caused by an animal or something that spooked the dog. And we quieted the dog down, and we began to gather together to pray again. And as we bowed our heads together, there was a little Christmas nutcracker that was sitting around on the kitchen counter, and it was about 3 or 4 meters away from us. And as we started to bow our heads together, the hat on the nutcracker came off of its head and flew across the room and smashed into the wall. There's no one else in the room with us. And literally the hair went up on the back of my neck. And I went, whoa, stop, right here. And I just literally said, I don't want to pray. And I said, did you see that? Why? How is that possible? Where did this hat come from? And see, I grew up in the Adventist faith. I grew up reading my Bible. I grew up reading the Spirit of Prophecy. And I'll tell you what, it was like everything I had grown up to believe just went like this. And I just went, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm literally so far from God that I know that there is a spiritual warfare that is happening between Christ and Satan. I know that there are angels and there are demons, and I know that this stuff exists. There was never a time in my life that I doubted it. And I said, how did I go away from God so far? And I literally sat down and I just said, how did I get here? It wasn't like one day I just decided, you know what? I don't want God anymore. It was one choice after one choice after one choice that I just took a step further and further out into the ocean until I was so far out in the ocean that I was literally sinking. And when I turned around, I realized how far I had actually walked away. And I said, what am I going to do now? I couldn't sleep that night, couldn't get this out of my head. I said, I know this war is real. I made my brother drive me to the airport, Sacramento airport, the next morning, and I jumped on an airplane. I didn't even want to drive home with him. And I literally just remember going back to my apartment in Los Angeles and just going, how am I so deceived that if Jesus came tonight, I would be lost. I'm totally on drugs. I have no care whatsoever of anything religious. What am I doing with my life? And so I started a very simple prayer. I said, Lord, I know you're real. I know you can help me. Send me someone. Teach me. Let me build a relationship with you again. And I'll tell you what, we serve a God of answered prayers. I prayed that prayer. I went back to my life as normal. And about a month later, I get a knock on my door. And this guy, I open up the door, and it's this kid from Northern California that asked me how my relationship with Christ was. And he's had a couple suitcases in his hands. And he said, hey, I wanted to come down to Southern California for a little bit and was wondering if I could live on your couch for a little bit. I kind of looked up and I said, interesting, God. Is this my answer to you sending me somebody to teach me more about you? And so he came in, and it was great. He had his guitar, he had his Bible. We started having Bible studies. We started singing all those songs I grew up singing as kids. And then we started inviting other people to the Bible studies. And we started I really started feeling like, wow, this is amazing. I mean, you pray to God and he answers your prayers. And I'm starting to have this transformation. And I'll tell you what, God always fights for us. But you know who else also fights for us? The devil. And the second the devil saw that he was losing his grip on me, these two drug dealers moved into the apartment below me. You see, I just moved into a new apartment because I wanted to transform my life. And I realized that all those old associations and all those people that I were friends with and all the party lifestyle type people, I said, I need to get away from that. And so I changed my location, moved into a new apartment. And this was the new apartment that this experience was happening into. And all of a sudden, right then, these two drug dealers who started moving in below the apartment below us, they were friendly. They were the friendly type. And my friend started going over to their apartment and witnessing to them. And he would come back and he would share what he had shared with them. And he said, man, this is awesome. You know, I'm sharing Jesus with them, and they're cutting up mounds of cocaine on the table. I mean, this is just awesome. And I'm thinking like, wow, Lord, we're going to convert some drug dealers. This is really amazing. And then my friends started coming home later and later at night. And before I knew it, the drugs started coming back into my home. I started engaging into that lifestyle again, and I started losing my grip on anything God. And I said, Lord, help me. I know you are a God of answered prayers. The one person that you sent me that was literally going to help me get on the right path is now falling back into the lifestyle that I just want to get away from. And I'll tell you what, we serve a God of answered prayers. There was a girl who I had grown up with in Paradise, and this other guy who was also from Paradise. He had grown up with her as well, and she was going to Loma Linda University. And she started coming out to visit. She knew my friend a little bit better than she knew me. She was quite a bit younger than me in school, so I was friends with her older sister, not so much her. And she started kind of coming out, and the first time she came out, we really struck up a relationship. And I said, wow, this is amazing. Like, this is the only Adventist girl I've ever really been interested in my adult life. And we started dating, and I started going back to church. And when I went to go out to visit her on the weekends, she was going to Loma Linda, I would go back to church. And I would just feel like I'm getting back to my. So anyway, I would go out to Loma Linda, and I would start going back to church, and it was a great experience. I was getting back to my roots. But then I would go back out to Hollywood, and I would party like a rock star. And then I would go back out to Loma Linda, and I'd be a good little church boy. And then I'd go back out to Hollywood, and I'd party like a rock star. And I lived this lifestyle of living in both of these worlds for a while, until I finally said, you know what? I know God is a God of change. And I know that he can change my heart. I know that he can transform me completely from the inside out. And I said, Lord, I know you can take these drugs away from me. I know you can take this lifestyle away from me. And I drove out to my then girlfriend's house at the time, knocked on her door at 6 o'clock in the morning after doing drugs all night long. And I sat her down and I said, I'm addicted to this and this and this. And I know that God can change my heart. I don't know if you want to stay with me through this process, but I know that God can change me. And I'll tell you what, I've been sober since that day. And I'll tell you even another great part of that story. That girlfriend is now my wife, and we have 2 beautiful children. And I'll tell you what, God works in mysterious ways, in miraculous ways. But brothers and sisters, can I tell you It is through the power of prayer. When you pray to God, God, help me, I'm sinking. Just like Peter jumps out of the boat, he's sinking down to the bottom. Lord, rescue me. He took his eyes off of Jesus, just like what I did for a majority of my 20s to 30s. I took my eyes completely off of Jesus, but I turned around and I said, Lord, save me. I'm sinking. And I'll tell you what, he does not ever ignore that call. And so God transformed my life in a miraculous way, and I started really building my relationship with him. And at first it wasn't easy, but you know what? I continued to dedicate my heart and my life to God every single day. And I started studying, and I started getting stronger, and I started just falling more and more deeply in love with Jesus. But I still worked in television, and I'd still work on all these TV shows. And some of the TV shows I'm frankly completely embarrassed that I worked on, because they're so bad and they're so evil and just full of just nonsense. Well, I started to pray a prayer to God. I said, God, I want to work for you. I don't know what you want me to do. I only have this skill of making productions and working in production and working with a video camera and editing and shooting and just working with media. I don't know what I can do for you, God, but whatever you want, I'm yours. And I'll tell you what, if you've ever prayed that prayer, ever, God will not ignore you. In fact, you better be ready to clear your plate, because God will so fill your plate full of things to do. Because like that saying in the Bible, it says that the fields are ripe and ready and plentiful. But I'll tell you what, the workers and the laborers are few. And so God really took that, and all of a sudden I got a phone call. And that phone call was from the youth pastor of the Paradise Church. And he called me up and he said, hey, I've heard that you've had a real transformation of heart, and we're putting together a little youth meetings, and I would just love it if you would come and share your experience about Hollywood and what you've learned out of this whole experience. And I just kind of once again looked up and I said, Lord, that's interesting. I asked you for something to do, and you answered. And so I decided to call him back. And I said, okay, I agree. I would love to come up and do it. But I'm such a new Christian back into the faith. I was very nervous about speaking in front of a large audience. And so I called up another friend of mine who was kind of a childhood best friend. And he was also from Paradise. And he also went to film school with us. But in film school, he decided to go off in a different direction. And he ended up in Montana. And so I called him up. He had come back into the church earlier than I, and he had a transformation a few years before me. So I knew that he would be very good to help me with really putting my biblical thoughts together. I could speak on Hollywood all day long, but really putting together a good Bible teaching out of the seminars too, I needed some help with. And then I called my brother up, who also kind of had a beginning of a transformation at the same time as well. And I said, I got this really interesting idea. This pastor wants us to come up and give a talk about Hollywood. And he suggested that maybe we show a movie and talk about God. And he was kind of hoping that we would show like maybe a Superman movie or something and equate Superman to be like Jesus. And that, frankly, is exactly what I would have done. And so I called my brother up. And I said, let's really sit down and let's put together a whole project and let's do something unique that we have never seen before. And so we started doing some research into the history of cinema. Where did movies come from? Where did television come from? And I had been a big collector of movies. And so I had a whole wall of films that I really liked. And there was a film called Fight Club that was with Brad Pitt and Edward Norton. It was from the early 2000s. And I just pulled it off the wall and I put it in, and just to try to get some inspiration, just trying to gather my thoughts and think about what to say. And in the middle of that movie, Edward Norton is in this really intense scene with Brad Pitt, and Brad Pitt slaps him, and he kisses his hand with lye and dumps lye all over his hand. And he says, you have to consider the possibility that God does not like you. In fact, God hates you. In all probability, we don't need him. Forget God, forget salvation. We don't need redemption. We're the children of the other side. And he says this whole monologue about how much God hates us. And I put it on pause. And I went, did he just tell me that God hated me? And I said, how come I've seen this movie 20, 30 times and I've never seen that? How is that possible that I could watch a movie and not remember what it said? I mean, if you told me that my mother hated me, I'm going to remember your face, I'm going to remember who you are, and I'm going to remember when you said that. How is it possible that somebody just told me God hated me, yet I've never recalled that in a movie, ever? And so then I sat there with my brother and my friend, and I said, what's happening inside of the brain when we're watching movies? And so I started doing research. What's going on inside the brain? What's happening in the frontal lobe? And I found out that the way the mind works is like a computer. It only can process so much information at one point in time. And in order to compensate for processing that information, it actually shuts off the frontal lobe and reacts off of the limbic system in the base and the back of the brain. And so you don't critically think about the information as it comes into your brain. And I said, oh my goodness. I said, that means that they could tell you whatever they want to tell you in that movie. And at the time, you will not consciously think about it. In fact, those words go into our memory and stay in our memory. And you oftentimes will not walk away from a movie and open up your Bible, have a Bible study, think about all the words that were said in those scenes. And so it dawned on me, how many other movies are doing this? And so we started putting in Superman, Batman, you name it, whatever movies I had on my wall. And all of a sudden, it was like God just took the wool off of my eyes. And I started to see, there's the warfare. It's right in front of me. In fact, all this entertainment that everybody's watching all the time is like a sermon. It's no different than a sermon. It's sharing information, a worldview, how are you supposed to order your life, how you're supposed to walk, how you're supposed to talk, what your relationship should look like. That's what a movie is doing to you. But guess what? That's exactly what a sermon's doing to you. Guess what? That's exactly what the Bible's doing for you. It's telling you how to order your life, how you should walk, how you should talk, how you should engage with humanity, how your relationship should look like on a linear plane, and how your relationship should look like with God. And I said, oh my goodness, this is what the devil's doing. He's using this entertainment style television as his sermons. So we put together a presentation, never thinking I was going to do this again. Now keep in mind, I still work in television. This is where I make my money. I made great money. In fact, I would have made a fantastic living at this. It was not my intention ever to leave that job. And I went up there and I presented this with my brother and my friend. And of course, the whole church the whole time was like, never heard anything like this before, right? What in the world? We had examples and we were linking the Bible with it and showing how this movie would say this, but the Bible says this, and it's teaching you different things. And I'll tell you what, never did I ever dream, ever in a million years, that God had an idea for a ministry. And pretty much right after this experience, we got a call from another church that said, hey, we heard about this presentation that you gave on media. Why don't you come give it here? So I went to that church. And then pretty much a school would call and they would say, hey, we heard about your presentation. Why don't you come here and do this? And then we were doing a camp meeting, and then they broadcast the camp meeting around the world. And before I knew it, Little Ligth Studios was born, and we started traveling all over the world sharing this message. And as we started to travel around the world, we kept thinking, this is a way for us to reach non-believers. Because we said, it's the non-believer that maybe if we can show them that they're warring against God, and if you have so many different movies, 20 different movies that have this very similar theme in them, maybe we can spark the inspiration enough for them to open their hearts to God, because they would say, well, why are they attacking God in this way in all of these different movies? There must be some truth with the war in heaven and earth. And God kept sending us to very conservative churches. I mean, we're talking, we would go to churches where everybody looked like looked like they walked off an Ellen White set. And we were like, what's going on? We're supposed to be going to the world and telling the world about all these things. And here you are sending us to the church, God. Why do you keep sending us to the conservative churches? And then I started asking questions when I would go to those churches. Didn't matter how conservative the church was. Hey, how many people are watching Batman? Every hand would go up. Hey, how many people have seen Superman? Every hand would go up. How many people have seen the Avengers? Every hand would go up. And it dawned on me, you know what? God is wanting us to be prepared to see him coming in the clouds. Many of these movies are planting opposite thoughts of God in our brains. And if we're watching them, you think of all the hours that are spent watching all this media. Are you spending the same hours in Bible study? It's really easy to spend 2 hours watching a movie. How many of you are spending 2 hours reading your Bible? That's a big difference between what we soak in the world and what we're trying to hear, that still small voice of God. We've been traveling around now for about 11 years, presenting on this topic. We started our YouTube channel, Little Ligth Studios. You can find us on YouTube. We've got a YouTube channel. And that really opened up the door for us to really take a look at and see what is the biggest demographic that needs to hear this truth of God. And of course, every demographic is very important, but we see the youth of our church leaving in droves. Many of them don't come back. In fact, most of them leave at age 18 and never return again, just like I ended up leaving around that same time. And so we decided to really design our content and our channel around youthful topics, things that are relevant, things that they're dealing with. Maybe they're parents and they have young, small children or anything like that. How can we show them Jesus in this current world that we're living in right now? And I'll tell you what, God has just really blessed, and it's been a really amazing opportunity to work in God's fields like this. But I'll tell you what, if you would have met me 10, 12 years ago, and actually 12 years ago from now, and you would have told me that someday I would come to your church and that I would preach a message from the Bible, I would have laughed at you and told you you are absolutely insane. And here I am today, in the middle of a ministry, in the end of the world, and working for God, doing what I absolutely love, and that's pointing people to my Savior. And I'll tell you what, all of that was simply because of prayer. God is a God of answered prayers. And I'll tell you what, I have been clean and sober since that day that I went over to my girlfriend's house, who's now my wife. If you're struggling with anything in this world, anything at all, God can help you. God can take that away from you. There is no deep depths that you can go. In fact, that's what it says in Romans right there. Now, I'm convinced, just like Paul was convinced, that there is nothing, no heaven, no hell, no angels, no anything that can separate us from the love of God. Right? He is desiring for us to give him our hearts and to surrender him our lives. And you will watch, he will transform your hearts. So it doesn't matter what you're struggling with. If you're struggling with anger, pornography, sexual addiction, you name it, God can take those things away from you. I'm walking proof of that. And there are many people who need you to go out and share with them. In fact, God has an opportunity and a job for you to do as well. And when we get to heaven, just think of it like this. No one is going to look back on their life and say, wow, I'm so glad I watched 2 hours of movies every single day. No one is going to say, I'm so glad that I played Fortnite or any video game for 5 hours a day. Do you know what people in heaven are going to say? Why didn't I spend my time more wisely? Why didn't I study more? Why didn't I share with my coworkers more? Why didn't I share with my family? My brother or sister is potentially maybe not here in heaven. Why didn't I reach out to them? Those are the things that you're going to regret. Not that you missed out on watching all of this entertainment or anything like that. If there's any takeaway that you can take away from this conversation, brothers and sisters, I just want you to know that God hears everything we say to him. And when we pray those simple prayers, Lord, I'm sinking, save me, he is ready and quick, and he is so willing to rush in there and save us. For me in my life, I got myself involved in a lot of terrible things. I did a lot of terrible things. I've been to a lot of dark places in my life. But you know what? When I came back to God, he didn't slap me and say, Scotty, shame on you. What did you do that for? You left. Do you know what he did? Just like the prodigal son came back to his father, he ran to me and he placed his loving arms around me and he gave me a beautiful wife and beautiful children. He gave me a beautiful ministry and a job that I love to go to every single day, because that's the kind of God that we serve. Do you want to serve him? Do you want to serve that kind of God? Because I guarantee you, you will not be sorry. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening. I hope you got a little blessing from this. Check us out, littlelightstudios.tv, or you can look us up on YouTube, Little Ligth Studios. And if you've got any comments, we'd love to hear them. And of course, share these messages and get out there in God's fields. Get involved in your local church. Get involved in spreading literature. Get involved in working for ministries. If you can't work for ministries, then get involved helping to support them. They need your financial support. I believe that time is so short right now, we barely have any time to work left. And while we have the opportunity, now is the opportunity. Get involved now. Thank you guys. We love you, and keep connected to Jesus.